Welcome to part 2 of chapter 19 on marketing events and trade shows. To start off, I'd like to look at a fairly well-known consumer event, meaning business to consumer, which is One Day Without Shoes. So I'll also attach this clip so you can look at it in its entirety. Now, One Day Without Shoes 2017 will be held in the spring. And this is something that TOMS does every year. They've been very successful with the event for a couple of reasons. First is if you think about integrated marketing communications, how does this event tie in with their image, with their central message? Would it be successful if TOMS did an International Golf Day? Well, let's think about what TOMS does. TOMS provides footwear, and for every pair of shoes that a consumer purchases, they donate one pair to a child who would otherwise not have shoes. So it's a one-to-one donation. And hearkening back a couple of chapters, this may remind you of what they were trying to do with EcoMom, not successfully, in that EcoMom, as you might recall, the CEO and founder Jody Sherman was trying to also tie in with a message of philanthropy, but TOMS has had an easier time from an accounting standpoint, for one thing, because with the one-to-one ratio, it was very easy to track. It was very easy to track that they were adequately allocating their revenues to their philanthropy, so they made sure they made a profit. The other reason why this works well is with EcoMom, it kind of tied in, the idea of feeding the hungry, but with TOMS, the IMC, or Integrated Marketing Communication, is very, very explicit in that their marketing approach, their big annual event, the One Day Without Shoes, ties in beautifully because it does directly tie into their product and it does directly tie into their message, in the sense that it allows someone, first world consumer, to experience a day without shoes, and it really gives them a way of emotionally connecting with that group, with the group that's benefited by TOMS. And I'm not arguing for or against TOMS. I know they've gotten mixed press in recent years, and then you'll get a chance to look at that in the discussion forum. And to be honest, a lot of that mixed press came about because their founder asked a researcher to look into how their giveaways were affecting the local population. But back to TOMS and IMC. So they're doing an effective version of what's called cause-related marketing. No doubt you're aware of other companies that do this and do this fairly well, and that it's gotten common. Cause-related marketing is interesting in that not only does it build a connection with the customer, assuming the customer cares about the particular issue, in this case, kids without shoes, but it has some other beneficial effects as well. A couple of my colleagues at the TEC de Monterrey in Mexico City researched cause-related marketing several years ago, before it had caught on entirely. And specifically, they researched it with American companies. And what they found was, in addition to consumers feeling better about the product, they were part of something bigger. The employees of companies who do cause-related marketing were more committed to their job, and they tended to stay there longer because they too felt like they were part of something bigger than just going to work. So TOMS is a very interesting example of international marketing and of an international event in the business to consumer realm, a lot of what the last part of chapter 19 talks about is international events and marketing in the business to business realm. So let's look at some of that in terms of trade shows, and then some issues with translation/interpretation. All right, broadly speaking, there are two types of trade shows. Vertical trade shows, where the attendees are part of the same industry. A good example is Cosmoprof, which is a cosmetics trade show. The current one being in Bologna, Italy. The opposite of a vertical trade show, of course, is a horizontal trade show where folks can be in different industries. Case example, Heart of Texas Green Expo. How does one identify the appropriate trade show or event and determine if it's advantageous? Well, one of the first things to do is find out what the success rate is of the event in previous years. You can reach out to the organizers and get a history to see how many vendors they've had in previous years. Understand what type of audience will be there, what the format is. Will there be speakers? Will there be informal events? Informal events, things like a lunch or wine tasting can be surprisingly helpful as a way to bond with customers. You can also contact attendees that have attended the show in the past, assuming they're not competitors, and ask them what their experience was. So before attending a trade show, you'd want to ask yourself some pretty explicit questions in terms of what are you hoping to get out of it? Are you doing it to evoke fairly immediate sales? If so, that's not the best approach to trade shows. Usually it's a way of building your market, building those contacts, gaining insights into what's going on in your industry. So you should ask yourself, are you doing it for publicity and brand awareness? Are you doing it to unveil new products? That's actually a very good use of a trade show. Are you looking for leads for future sales? Are you doing it to scope out competition and or to network? So the answers to some of these questions will help you determine what your return on investment for a particular show might be. Once you've decided to attend a trade show, there are a couple of other things to think about. One, if you are organizing your own event, you want to make sure it's not conflicting with something in the local environment. If it's commercially organized, something like the Cosmopro, I would assume they would work around that and it wouldn't conflict. So then the question becomes, what type of pre-event communication is appropriate from your company? It's very common to send out communications to your biggest customer saying, hey, we're going to be at this trade show, we're unveiling the new product, here's our booth number, we'd love to see you there. In addition to that, coming back to IMC or Integrated Marketing Communications, this is an excellent opportunity to tie in with your social media both before the event and after the event. In terms of making a trade show successful, you may be doing some sort of presentation if you have a technology product. It's important to build in time for face-to-face contact because that is so important for building the relationships. It's important to plan ahead on things like signage, booth location. Is your booth going to be on a corner so that you can get a lot of foot traffic? And think about how you can spin it if you are introducing some form of new technology to really showcase that. And that is one of the things that attendees will look for, is what's new and exciting in the industry. In terms of international events, seems like almost a funny place to put the issue about machine translation, but translation interpretation issues actually tie in very, very well here, in that one of the pitfalls that I've observed that's not talked about in your chapter is allowing enough time in international events to accommodate interpretation. Several years ago, I attended a meeting that the local Center for International Trade Development put on with some delegates from Beijing. And they had a fairly tight schedule. They said at 10 o'clock we're going to do this, at 11 o'clock we're going to move on to the next thing. Well, the problem was by 10:20 they weren't done with the initial portion because they had not thought about the fact that when you're going from English to Mandarin to English, it takes more time. So it takes actually approximately time and a half. So it's important to account for that. In terms of translation, the written word, it's funny that your author really discourages that and using machine translation. And to some extent, he has a point. And I'm listing some words on the right that you probably recognize because they're in English. But you've probably also figured out by glancing at them that English and English are not necessarily the same thing. So bloody, as you well know in the United States, means bleeding or having blood come out of it. In England, I got in trouble with this one because I said, quote, he has a bloody nose. And I made the mistake of saying that in front of a British 4-year-old who freaked out because I thought he thought I was saying he has a blanking nose. So some of the other terms we also think we know. Doodle is what you do in your biology class when you should be paying attention. To chuff, when I grew up, was the sound that a train made, the little engine that could, chuffed up the hill. However, if you chuff in British English, it means to be very pleased with yourself or with something. Plot is also different. I recently went to a lecture on what's going on with NASA, and I spaced out for a minute, and I lost the plot. However, had I lost the plot in England, it would have meant that I lost my cool. I got very mad, which fortunately I didn't do. So, machine translation, not surprisingly, it's been around for a while. I mean, the Google Translate has been around for 10 years, and up until very recently, it was problematic because of some of these differences, and also because the way that they chunked it, it sounded very artificial, and you could come up with some really funny translations. A case in point is translating from German to English. You could come up with, no problem can be solved from the same consciousness that they have arisen. Well, that just sounds a little awkward, and I'm not entirely sure what that means. The exciting news is Google has just come out with this huge leap, according to their CEO. This leap to neural translation is a bigger change than the last 10 years combined. So if you look at the right, you can see the same translation, and you can see that it really is a lot closer to proper grammar and to the way that humans speak. So we still need to be cautionary with machine translations. And actually with any translation, I would encourage you to do what's called a back translation. So if you are going from German to English, it would be appropriate to have another German speaker then go from that English back to German to make sure that it really makes sense. However, as I said, I'm very encouraged by the new developments in neural translation. So you have an opportunity in the discussion forum to examine what TOMS is doing, and I will be very interested to hear what your comments are.